Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. Before I get started, one thing I wanted to do was thank Sustrans for their partnership in this event. Sustrans, you know, is the charity that works on sustainable transport. Just to give you a sense of how effective they are at that, I've just been asked by Sustrans to inform you that if you want to sustain yourself in the event of an emergency, this is the fire exit, and you should transport your way out of there as quickly as possible. A serious thank you to you all for coming this afternoon. My name's James Harding. I'm the editor of The Times, and I well appreciate that, given that we've had our first sight of blue sky in living memory, the fact that you've chosen to be in here with us this afternoon, we all appreciate. And I was about to launch into an equally baroque thank you to the mayoral candidates who've all joined us today, given how busy they are, how little time there is until polling day, the fact that they've devoted their time to come and talk about what they would do about cycling in this city, I think speaks a great deal about their commitment to it. But before I got into that baroque thank you, it suddenly struck me that it's entirely right and proper that they should be here. There are 500,000 people who in one form or other take a cycle ride every week in this city. As we all know, cycling is not safe enough here, and we at the Times have been traumatised by this. A fantastically talented young journalist, Mary Bowers, was knocked off her bicycle just in front of our office 6 months ago, and 6 months later she's not regained consciousness. So we have felt this very deeply, and clearly we're not alone. There are many other people who've lost loved ones on the roads of this city and seen them very badly injured, and so it's entirely right that 4 days out from an election, one of the key issues that is being addressed by the mayoral candidates is cycling safety. I hope that this event will feel like yours, a chance for you to quiz the candidates for mayor. What I was going to do was ask them a couple of pretty simple questions first, and then open things up to questions. I'm sure that there are many scientific ways of doing this and of introducing each candidate to speak. I was going to go for the system known as left to right, and starting with Siobhan and coming all the way across to Jenny. So can I start by asking a really simple question, and I'd like to limit you each to just a couple of minutes to answer it. And the simple question is, if you get elected mayor on Thursday, what will be different for cyclists in 2 years' time? And we start with Siobhan Benita, the independent candidate.
First of all, can I just say very, very big thank you for allowing me here. This is the first Hustings I've been allowed on alongside the other candidates. I'm really pleased about that. What will be different? I will make this a mayoral priority. There is no rocket science here. This is something that you absolutely have to focus on. My own reality is I have 2 daughters of my own. I live in an outer borough. There is very little provision out there. I would love to be able to cycle with them to Richmond Park, which is very close to me, and I can't. So what will be different is a complete, relentless focus on doing the things that have been identified in these campaigns that need to be done. So we will look at the junctions. We will put in completely physically separated routes where possible, and where that isn't possible, then I will use creative ideas to make cycling more safe in London.
Thank you. Boris Johnson.
We will continue with the massive expansion of cycling in London that's taken place over the last few years, and we'll do that by making cycling ever safer. We're going to put in more cycle superhighways. I think there's a huge opportunity to expand those. We will be reviewing loads of roundabouts, junctions across London. That's already happening. We're doing 500 at the moment. We're putting Trixie mirrors all the way down the cycle superhighways. We are putting in another 68,000 Sheffield stands. We will, of course, be expanding the cycle hire scheme. And I can't guarantee that this will all be done within 2 years, but it will be well on the way. And you will be seeing those hire bikes poised to go east, west, south, and north, and to colonize fresh territories of the city. And in 2 years' time, I hope that we will have continued our work of bringing down the number of KSIs on the streets of London and of cycling KSIs. They have gone down in the last 4 years, but patently there, and I hear the barracking of the crowd, patently there is more to do, and I humbly accept the criticisms of the city as it is. It's imperfect for cycling. My ambition is to make it one of the greatest cities to cycle in the whole of Europe, and we can do that, but we can't do that. And I'm going to hand on in a minute as soon as I stop talking. We can't do that if one of your core proposals is to cut investment in transport by £1.14 billion. And I humbly submit to you, my fellow cyclists, that it is difficult to promise to do a lot for cycle safety when you're going to take a lot out of transport infrastructure budgets in London.
Thank you very much. Ken Livingstone.
Well, immediately we will reinstate on the first day that formally the Mayor's powers kick in, which I think is on the Sunday. We will reinstate for Transport for London their order of priorities is pedestrian and cycling safety goes back to being number one. We will reinstate and carry on the work that was interrupted so rudely 4 years ago of the London Cycle Network, where we got down to the most recalcitrant boroughs and make that a priority. I will ask our officers, because we did have a target of getting from the 1% I inherited, we got it up to 2% of journeys in London by cycles. We had a target of 5. I think that's not ambitious enough. We'll be looking at something like 10 or 15%. We will give priority to cyclists at left turns, so they get 5 seconds to turn left before the HGV runs over them. We will reinstate the cycling safety measures that were removed by the Mayor's office at Bow Junction roundabout and other areas. And to make sure all this happens, we will appoint Jenny Jones to take charge of cycling inside TfL and drive this agenda forward.
And walking.
Brian Paddick.
Like Ken, from day one, the TfL priority has to change from smoothing traffic flow, which I have said before, that priority is killing cyclists, to one where pedestrian and cycle safety is the priority rather than smoothing traffic flow. Day 2, that will be the Monday, won't it? Start putting pressure on government to have compulsory motion sensors down the side of long vehicles so that drivers know when there is a cyclist on their near side. I think that's the only way that we are going to make sure that cyclists are safe from left-turning vehicles. Thankfully, the Lib Dem transport ministers made it easier to implement 20-mile-an-hour limits, and in busy areas, particularly around schools and shopping areas, on red routes, which is something the Mayor has control over, we will start implementing those in the first year, and obviously having shown local authorities that it's possible, then put pressure on local authorities to do it on their roads as well. And of course, junction safety, starting with the junctions on the cycle superhighways, but making sure that all junctions are safe for cyclists. Implementing the sorts of plans, for example, like the plan for the north side of Blackfriars Bridge that London Cycling Campaign drew up, using that as an example of how we can make our junctions much safer for cyclists.
Thank you very much. And Jenny Jones, assuming that Ken Livingstone is working for you rather than the other way around, what will you be doing on Sunday?
Well, first of all, thank you to the Times, because for a national newspaper to take up the issue of cycling safety, I think is absolutely phenomenal. Well done for doing it. You had no idea that it would bring you any votes. Now, I have a dream of London in 2 years' time, and I don't think we can achieve this dream, but I would like to say that in 2 years' time, we will have the most shocking news that we have had no road deaths in London. Now, wouldn't that be great? No road deaths. That's something we absolutely have to aim for. And I would like to think that cycling as a percentage of modal share had increased, and perhaps, why not 6.5%? I just made that up, which I'm not allowed to do on platforms, but let's dream about how we can move up to much greater levels of cycling. Now, to do that, my two colleagues on my immediate left, Ken and Brian, have outlined some of the excellent measures. We would also, I think, in 2 years, have to have at least 10 boroughs join Islington as 20 miles an hour default boroughs. Islington was very brave to be the first one, but we have to bolster them and make others do the same. Cycle hire in 2 years' time, we've expanded to the size of Paris's scheme. It is still only a third of Paris's scheme. Why is that when we're a so much bigger city? It's unambitious. The traffic police will have trebled their budget so that they can actually help enforce the law of the road and make sure that, for example, advanced stop lines are kept for the people who are meant to use them, the more vulnerable road users, the cyclists. And cycling facilities will be so good that I won't be embarrassed to meet mainland Greens anymore, mainland European Greens, because at one time I could go there and actually talk about London in a quite radical way, and now it's just embarrassing. So that's where we'll be in 2 years' time.
Thank you very much. Can I follow up on a couple of those things? Let me start, Boris Johnson. I'm well aware there are people in this room who have much greater expertise than I do on the issue of cycle safety in London. But I think our understanding is that it's not the case that in the last 4 years you've seen improvements on the roads. In fact, particularly in the last 3 years, we've seen increases in the numbers of people killed or seriously injured. And I wonder why you think that is.
Well, you know, one death is really things, and obviously your campaign is in the context of the terrible injury suffered by Mary Bowers, and I think it's wonderful that you're doing it, and I support it completely, but I do think it important, nonetheless, humbly and respectfully, to insist that if you look at the figures which TfL have provided for me, which I have no reason to believe they are misleading me about, fatalities on average have fallen in the last 4 years by comparison with the previous mayoralty in absolute, just in absolute terms, and KSIs on TfL roads, and indeed I think on London's roads altogether, are down as a proportion of the trips the cycling journey is taken. That is no cause for complacency. We must go forward with measures to improve cycling and to make people feel safer, and that's why I will expand the cycle superhighways, and we will go on with all the measures that we put in to make sure that drivers of HGVs understand the risks that they pose, and also that cyclists understand the dangers that they are in, and we will continue to invest in the often quite sophisticated technological improvements that we can make to junctions and roundabouts to make cycling safer in the city. It does, I'm afraid, mean some sometimes expensive interventions. And again, I get to my point, you can't do these things with no cash. And with the greatest, I cannot see how a Labour programme that involves cutting transport investment can deliver those improvements. Jenny Jones at least has the advantage of wanting to put in a big congestion charge for motorists, which I can add, that is a way of raising funds to do this. But as far as I know, Ken Livingstone hasn't yet committed himself to that agenda, though he may very well want now to reveal that that is his hidden plan. This would be, I think in front of this audience of cyclists, Ken, this would be the moment for you to break cover and explain how you're going to fund it.
Could we come to that in 1 minute? Just so we follow, we'll kick the tires on exactly what the numbers are and make sure we get those right in the paper tomorrow. But let's just go back to...
Just on that.
No, we'll do that, but otherwise we'll get stuck in this. I know there's
I've got them here, actually.
And I think we've got them too. So
it's not what Boris says.
just so I'm clear, what you hear most commonly, Boris Johnson, is people say, we have a cycling mayor. We have a mayor who quite evidently loves cycling in the city, who's been a champion of the cycle hire scheme, and yet the system that he's put in place for road safety is inadequate. That notwithstanding the cycle superhighways, it's too often the case that the system that we've got in place to protect cyclists is essentially a splash of paint on the road, and that's not a sufficient way to protect cyclists. What do you say to people who make that complaint?
Well, about the cycle superhighways, I would say they're not just a splash of paint on the road, and that is to misunderstand. That is to misunderstand the complexity and the expense of the interventions involved. On the cycle superhighways, there has been a substantial increase in cycling. On each of them, roughly speaking, there's been a 70% increase. Of course, perhaps we could do it better. We could find, of course, in an ideal world, I can imagine that people here would wish to have a complete segregation of cyclists from motorists. I have to tell you, in all candour, I don't think that is going to be very easy to achieve, or not without colossal expense. And I must be frank with you about that. We will expand the cycle superhighways. I do think that they create confidence in cyclists, and I do think that they're a scheme worth pursuing. And on cycling fatalities, KSIs, I'm afraid I must stick to my guns here. The reality is that the average number of casualties per year has come down in the last 4 years, as against the period 2002 to 2008 when measurements were first taken. And that is true both of TfL roads and of borough roads. And that does not mean that the situation is perfect. All right? I'm not saying this is not an argument for complacency. This is an argument for active intervention, which is what we are going to do. What I'm putting to you is that you can't be active and you can't be interventionist if you're going to go around cutting TfL budgets.
Ken Livingstone, can I turn to you? You may want to address the question of whether or not you're going to crank up the congestion charge, or whether or not you're going to have sufficient funds to commit to building safe cycleways. I had a much more specific question. A number of years ago, you talked about introducing licence plates for cyclists. Is that still something that you think would be a good thing for cyclists in the city?
I think that was a response to the Mayor's question of whether we should do something. I said it's something we could look at. Clearly, in the present time, anything that would drain resources away for running some big bureaucracy to do that is not on. In this period, when you're in a recession, you don't do anything to waste money. You just try and get money back in people's pockets. That's why we'll cut fares, freeze the congestion charge, freeze the council tax, anything that helps us out of this double-dip recession. On the question of investment, there's no problem here. In each year of the last 4 years, we've seen an underspending of often over £250 million on the investment budget. Now, I don't necessarily blame the Mayor for that. That might be bureaucracy running slowly, whatever, but I do like doing the day job and attention to detail, and we will bear down on that. And the £250 million unspent in the investment budget in the last 12 months, we'll start diverting that, not into just putting in the cycling safety measures, but also restoring the cut in the disability access programme at our stations. We've got a budget that just is completely bloated into it. It's most probably the only public sector budget in that area. If you look at the Moody's report this January, they identified a 1.3 billion surplus in a budget of 9 billion. We're putting 269 of that million back in London's pockets with the fares cut. But don't worry, boys, under me, we will accelerate investment across the whole area because I'll do the day job rather than taking off 2 months to write a book about Florence Nightingale.
Caleb, can I say one thing that people will ask is that you had 8 years to deal with issues around cycling, and the concern will be that this is something that you leap upon in the run-up to an election, but when you're actually in the job, you haven't shown yourself in previous terms to be committed to the cause of cyclists. Why have you changed, or how have you changed to make people believe that you are now committed?
That just isn't the case. We set out, nothing was happening on cycling when I was elected. We set out to turn the whole transport system round. We renewed the entire bus fleet, we increased it from 5,500 to 8,000, we got 50% increased bus ridership. The whole strategy of the Mayoral was to shift people out of their cars into walking, cycling and public transport. We went from the pathetically low 1% cycle journeys as a total of journeys in London. We doubled it to 2. We were getting to the critical mass where we could really move forward. That's why we had a target of taking up to 5%. We had the London Cycling Network, which we took up. We took up the cycling routes and demands in London and started to run with those. We got a lot of boroughs cooperating with us. We've got down to the recalcitrant ones, predominantly conservative boroughs who didn't think there should be any interruption in people's right to drive as and when they wish. And we're making very good progress. We'll pick up where we left off and drive it forward much more relentlessly. That's why we want Jenny doing it.
Very good. Thank you. Brian Paddick, I understand that in the most terrific weather on Saturday morning you came out and cycled, but that you're not regularly a cyclist, not least because the streets that you feel are quite unsafe. And I wondered whether or not what we hear at the moment, both from Ken Livingstone and from Boris Johnson, are addressing a number of the, if I call them technical issues, but not a great plan to reinvent the city that makes it enjoyable for cyclists and they can cycle with the kind of safety that you enjoy on Saturday morning. Are you willing to commit yourself and the Lib Dems to that kind of investment in cycling in London?
Yes, I am, and yes, the Liberal Democrats similarly. When you look at the record of the London Liberal Democrats on the London Assembly, for example, and the work that they've done improving in terms of putting pressure on the mayor to improve junctions, in terms of the installation of trixie mirrors at junctions, for example, we have, I would argue, the Liberal Democrats have done more to change things in London for cyclists than anybody else. I mean, when I talk to people about, people say, well, what's London going to be like in 4 years' time? I keep saying, I want a more civilised London. And part of that is people being more civilised on the roads. Now, part of that is going to be education, a sort of a change a change of culture, if you will. But it has to be backed up by these sorts of practical measures. And I have to say, it seems to be the complete opposite of what Boris Johnson is saying. Boris Johnson is talking like some irresponsible general who is saying, oh, well, we've got lots more troops, doesn't matter if we take a few casualties, but as long as we've got more people cycling. Well, I'm sorry, that's completely the wrong way around. We have got to make sure that the roads are safe for cyclists before we encourage lots more people to take it up. I know it's a bit chicken and egg, but I've got my cycle key here. I mean, I don't use it anymore because I was fed up with getting to my destination and find there was nowhere to park it. What Boris Johnson promised to implement was a cycle hire scheme that actually paid for itself, and this one is costing millions of pounds in subsidy simply because it is mismanaged. Unlike Boris Johnson, who feels that it's a breeze just to cycle around Elephant and Castle roundabout as if it's a fun, I'm absolutely petrified of it. Now, I'm a strapping lad, I'm physically fit, and if I'm afraid of doing it, how many more people in London are put off from cycling because the safety measures simply aren't there? And I want to get to a stage in 4 years' time where the Mayor of London, alias me, will be happy to go and ride round these dangerous junctions, or at least where there is a safe route through.
Thank you. Jane Jones, can I ask you a question? To a certain extent, you're playing on home ground here. You're the Green Party. You should, command the issue of cycling. And it isn't a dirty secret here that even if you become mayor at the end of this week, you don't really have either the power or the resources to do anything meaningful about changing the shape of the city for cyclists. How would you address that problem?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
In that, the mayor's powers don't necessarily command sufficient resources in terms of building new roads, in terms of legislating on trucks and the requirements on trucks. How do you deal with the fact that this is a very significant problem in London, but the London mayor doesn't necessarily have the authority to deal with all the issues around it?
I think you're right in a way that sometimes there's not the power there, but at the same time, the mayor has immense influence with businesses, with all organisations across London, so I think it will be possible. And working with the boroughs want their streets safe as well. The boroughs know that if you improve the way that the traffic, or if you reduce the traffic and actually slow it down, life's better for everybody. You know, can I just say about these spurious figures that TfL has produced for Boris Johnson? Boris and I have had an ongoing spat for at least 6 months about the figures, and we got fact-checked, and it says these figures show that the total casualty rate in London has increased since 2008, and the killed and seriously injured rate has increased marginally in the same period. Whereas it's increased, whereas before we had a year-on-year fall in deaths and injuries on our roads, and we are now seeing a slight rise. That's the wrong way to go, and I do hope you'll use my set of figures rather than his set of figures in your paper tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Siobhan Benita, I have a simple question. Your candidacy has obviously taken a lot of people by surprise. I wonder a little bit whether or not this issue has taken you by surprise, whether you actually have a real plan for it, or just it's one of the issues that confronts any future London mayor, and so therefore you want to speak on it.
Well, it's both. I mean, it is one of the issues that confronts any mayor, so I do want to speak on it. But like with so many issues I'm finding during this campaign, my frustration is there is a huge gap between what you hear the party politicians saying and the reality of day-to-day life for people. So to me, these are all, they're warm words. They're, I will do all of this, and I'll do, how are you actually going to achieve all of this? And this is where I think my civil service background actually stands me in good stead here. To make these changes, to actually make this happen at ground level, the mayor has to get micro. The mayor has to be working with boroughs, with all the organisations, to say what exactly is your plan for doing this and hold them to account. So with boroughs, it's fine to say I want 10 boroughs to go 20 miles per hour. How are you going to do that? As you're saying, what's the influence of the mayor? You have to start doing things like league tables, holding them to account, making it public, making it really transparent. That's how you're going to drive change. In terms of, you know, you don't have a lot of resources. I agree with Boris. You know, there isn't a massive amount of money to make the changes that everybody would like to do. So we have to enforce the things better that we've already said should be done. For example, I travelled here today deliberately to make the point. I travelled in an HGV. It's a company who have gone out of their way to put all of the security measures in place that they've been told to do so that they can work on Crossrail projects.
Well, that was actually, I mean, thank you, Siobhan. Can I just say on that, that was an example, as you will find if you become, well, when you become there, you know, if you become, when you become there, you will find that TfL, using its influence through the Freight Operators Recognition Scheme, not only can get lorries in doing, say, Crossrail to make sure that they have the sidebars that and the sensors that we want, but they can also make sure that lorries across London have those.
The problem is, Boris, nobody else is enforcing that scheme. So they're doing it, but they're seeing other lorries day to day go in and working on Crossrail projects who haven't done any of that thing. So I'm saying it's all very well, again, for the politicians saying these things, you have to back them up, you have to enforce them, and that's how you're going to drive change. It's about doing things efficiently and effectively, and not just saying the words, backing it up, because my reality as a normal member of the public does not match any of this day to day, and that's where you have to make a difference.
Thank you very much. What I was going to suggest we do now is open things up to the floor for as many questions as possible. A few ground rules. One is I'd like them to be questions, not speeches. So I'm going to take 3 at a time, and thirdly I'm going to ask you each to just to say who you are before you ask your question. When we finish the round of questions, I'm going to turn to each of the candidates and just give them a couple of minutes to round up on cycling or any other issue that they think a community of London voters needs to hear before Thursday. I'm going to start with the lady right in the middle, or there's a lady right there, put her hand high up, and then we'll come down to the front here.
Do I have to address it to a specific person?
Either one or a couple, but Yes, whoever you think is appropriate.
Ruth Mayorkas, I live in Chiswick. I'm a daytime cyclist. I don't work, I ride my bike every day, do all my shopping by work. My question is for Boris. One of the comments you just made is that it's impossible to move that amount of money, to divert it from transport into cycling. What is cycling, everybody? I think it is transport.
That's not what I said.
That's what I heard. You did take away the Western congestion charge, and I live in Chiswick, and the congestion in Chiswick is appalling. What I'd like to know is, my taxes are paying for Hammersmith flyover repairs. I never drive over it. I didn't cause that problem. I cycle everywhere, or I use the bus. People cannot get around because of the damage to this flyover. Will you make it into one lane for cyclists on either side, please?
Thank you very much. There's a gentleman in the middle, if you come down, and then we'll come down.
Rick out of the London Cycling Campaign. Do the candidates agree that the vital junction safety review should be undertaken by an independent panel and not by the very inexperienced team who gave us a dangerously substandard cycle superhighways?
Thank you very much. One question here, the gentleman right in front.
Tom Bogdanovich, London Cycling Campaign. You've probably heard about 37,000 signatures of the petition asking you to make our roads as safe and inviting for cycling as they are in Holland. And the Times campaign, 35,000 signatures. I know that you have all promised to meet the demands of the Love London Go Dutch campaign. The key tests were the 3 flagship projects to Go Dutch standards, cycle superhighways to Go Dutch standards, Transport for London Roads, which you will be running as mayor, to Go Dutch standards. And what I'd like to know is, what will you be doing to deliver that? What will your first action be to realise those promises?
Okay, thanks very much. Boris Johnson, why don't we start with you with the 2 questions. One is on the Hammersmith flyover, whether or not you would commit a lane either way to cyclists, and 2, whether or not you allow future junction safety reviews to be conducted independently.
Well, I think the question was also about how can you're making the point that investment in cycling is investment in transport. And of course, you're absolutely right. My point is quite simply that you can't have a fares cut which takes 1.14 billion out of TfL's investment budgets without affecting our ability to progress cycling improvements. And I'm afraid I must take issue with what Ken Livingstone had to say about this so-called surplus. Every time he put fares up by record amounts, indeed every time he broke his promise and put fares up by record amounts, there was a similar so-called surplus in TfL budgets. The Moody's report to which he refers actually shows that the sum is allocated to the Piccadilly line upgrade. And I don't think, with the best will in the world, that even people in this room, manic cyclists though we all are, want London to forego the Piccadilly line upgrade. The cash that sits in TfL balances is allocated to important projects, including cycling. And if you cut that cash, you cut that those resources, you cut our ability to do wonderful things for cycling. That is the point I'm making. And on the Hammersmith flyover, I think it's a fantastic example of the importance of not making short-term cuts in transport infrastructure investment, because that's a structure that, well, I'm afraid, would have fallen down had we not intervened to prop it up. It is a vital artery in our city. I will certainly look with interest at your proposal to put cycle lanes on it. I don't know whether that would be whether that would work. I don't know whether that would be the right thing for that part of London. I'm certainly not going to. I'm not going to promise it now. What I will do is I will promise to look at it.
And Boris Johnson, just the junction safety point, the independent review.
Well, I'd be interested to know where the gentleman is there, who your independent reviewers would be.
Not the same team that built cycle superhighways such a low
there many different points of view about how junctions should work and how they could be improved. I want to make sure that we do the best we possibly can for cyclists and for pedestrians, and that's why we are reviewing 500 junctions and roundabouts now, and that again will take investment, it will take energy, it will take effort, and it will take investment. And it's vital that you have a mayor who will go in to, as I did the other day, I got another 15 million from the government for improving roundabouts in London. It's vital you have a mayor who's able to go into government, not showboating away, not calling for the coalition to be exterminated, or whatever the definition of Kennedy is, who will be able to get the investment that London needs to make these improvements.
Kennedy, can I ask you one other question from the gentleman from London Cycling? I mean, what is the sort of thing one that you would do in response to their particular campaign, Go Dutch?
I mean, anything that we can take from Europe that works, we will take it in Europe. And I mean, Jenny will have a complete free hand to do that. On the question of independent panel, I'd be quite happy to have the London Cycling Campaign have complete access to all the files of Transport for London and all the internal workings to keep a sort of monthly or quarterly assessment on what we're doing. I mean, we're not building nuclear weapons inside TfL. There's nothing that needs to be secret inside the bureaucracy of TfL. So we'll open it all up, and London Cycling Campaign can be that independent assessment. On the Hammersmith Byway, let's remember, Hammersmith Byway was designed at a time when there was a plan to have 3 great ringways in London. And therefore, they built that, but they didn't build the ringway to go in, and it's pretty much of a nightmare. If it's possible to do that with a cycle lane on each side, we'd be happy to do it. You've just got to get in and test that out and see it. And then finally, on all the little digs I'm getting from my friend on the left here about fares. I mean, I cut fares by 30%. In 1981, the world didn't end. The judges were pissed. The judges were pissed.
The government took away the London.
No. I mean, then in 1983, we came back and cut them 25%. And so many more people used the system. The following year, we were able to cut what was then the rates, now the council tax by 7%. In this calculation, I'm embarrassed it's only 7%. But it's all we can safely do without impacting on investment. Back in September, when I first pointed out we're going to cut the fares, TfL convened an urgent meeting because I said there's a surplus built up of 250 million. They didn't take the decision to use that 250 million to advance an investment programme. They used it to pay, they used 183 million to pay back debt years early to get rid of that embarrassing surplus. But because we got Marston Perth, well, it's come back, it's now 338 million. And in all our calculations, we've not allowed for any extra income from increased ridership. If there is, we'll most probably extend the freeze on fares for another year, or we'll pinch Brian Paddick's excellent idea about having a 1-hour travel pass. Boris, you've got to get your head around one thing. You can't make London safer for cyclists if you've got fares so high, it's cheaper to get in your car. Let's make it cheaper.
Livingstone is saying things once again that he simply knows are not true. And every year that he put up fares by record amounts, he had identical so-called surpluses. The reason he did not use those surpluses to cut fares was because they are allocated to investment going forward. And that is the reality. And you've got to be, we've only got a few days now, Ken. You've not only failed to reveal your, you still haven't come clean with Londoners about how you would fund this 1 billion cut in our investment budget. And I think we should do so.
Can I suggest that we deal with what we would call our issues at the end? And
we'll take it out to the lid.
Let's stick with cycling. There's a lady whose arm's going to come out of her socket at the back here.
From the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. My question is one on transport. It's the excessive delays that we've been seeing at Heathrow Airport. And I'd like to address this to Boris Johnson. What do you think about those delays and what do you think should be done about it? I don't think that's
Could I can I say, if you're Australian, that's a very valid cycling question. But we will come back to it in a moment. There's a gentleman just a little further down. Yes, here.
I'm Rupert Wiley, I live in Brentford, cycle everywhere, nearly hit several people going ridiculous in Hammersmith with a separate cycle lane, people just wander into. My question relates to provisions for cycling as part of the broader transport network. In Vancouver you can quite readily take bicycles on the buses, but do any of the panel agree that the lack of provision for cycling as a part of the system as a whole, i.e. if more than one cyclist turns up to get on a train per carriage, is there going to be any provision for that? And also the lack of provision for you being able to leave a bike anywhere without it being lost or stolen or damaged. There's a part of travelling around London, it's quite a big place. I regularly travel and cycle 14, 15 miles, but I acknowledge that most people aren't up for it, or if it's raining, they're not that keen. So if you want to be able to have people cycling, broadly speaking, you need to have them use the public transport network as well, and there isn't much provision for that.
Thank you very much. There's a gentleman at the end of that row. That's what I'm going to come down and get to that. And there's a lady after you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Steve Hode. I'm in a difficult position. I'm a keen cyclist as well as I own a vehicle that Siobhan arrived in this afternoon. The problem is I'm all in favour. I've spent thousands of pounds making sure that all of my vehicles comply to the new legislation that should be introduced and should be introduced faster to save the life, because at the end of the day £2,500 is a small amount of money to pay to actually look after a cyclist. But there is also something else that could be done and to look after these cyclists, and that is actually to bring some form of legislation in to actually make sure that the cyclists are aware of the lorries as well. Because if any of us sitting in this room right now could walk into a main dealer of a cyclist outlet, purchase a cycle and go straight onto the public highway with no experience at all. An HGV driver, a car driver, have to go through a minimum of a 1-week exam. An HGV driver then has to, in my company, go through a further 3 months. And the problem is that people's awareness is not there.
Very good. Thank you very much. And the lady just in front of you.
Thank you. Jen Bates, Friends of the Earth London campaigner. Basically, we did a ranking with Greenpeace about the greenest sort of mayoral candidates, and there were huge differences between them on cycling and transport generally, and on air pollution, with surprise, Jenny first, then Ken, then Brian Paddick, and then Boris as the overall ranking. So I want to know, how would you improve our ranking of you on this cycling issue, and how would you ensure that EU limits are met by the dates required? And will this involve cutting traffic levels, which will actually make cycling and walking safer and help with air pollution? And will you stop doing...
That's about 4 questions.
Okay, and the dust suppressants. Would you stop doing dust suppressants, and will you issue health warnings when pollution is dangerous?
Okay, let's do this. If anyone wants to tackle the Heathrow question, I suggest we do that at the end of the session. Although I do appreciate that if you're Australian, that's a relevant transport question. So let's go instead. Can I ask Siobhan Benita and then Jen to address this question that was raised about how we integrate cycles on all of our transport networks, on buses and tubes and trains. Siobhan Benita, why don't we start?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And also, can I just pick up on the Hammersmith flyover question? This is my point again. We've all signed up to Go Dutch, which means that every major chance we get to consider cycling options, we've already said we'll do it, and yet here you're having to ask again, will we do it? And it just proves my point that politicians say a lot of things, they don't actually mean it. So that should have been taken as a given, that we would all consider that, absolutely. In terms of the provision, absolutely right. There is no strategic oversight here. We need to get more parking facilities across London. We need to get smarter at allowing shared use of tubes and trains. So could we allocate specific places on the trains for people to be able to put their bikes or not? We need to do... Sorry?
Something like that. I mean, we need more like that. And I also want to pick up on your point that you said in the narrow spaces where people walk into the lanes as well, pedestrians are a big danger for cyclists as well. Yeah. 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 And this comes back. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a hustings, not a chat.
No, and this comes back. This picks up on one of the other points that you're making about education. I think, as with so many things in my manifesto, you have to start early. We have to be teaching in school much more awareness about cycle safety, about road use in general to our kids, so that we get them excited about using bikes, but we also get them much more aware of how we use roads safely across London.
Jenny Jones.
There are so many topics I want to pick up on here. Can I just go back to this cycling superhighways a moment? Because to be fair to Boris, and I don't like being fair to Boris, but on this occasion, the fact is they are a bit more than blue paved, because there's some junctions that I really thought were going to be disastrous, and they have been worked out. So, you know, they can be better, they just need to be enforced. We shouldn't see parking in them, we shouldn't see cars using them. I think that's the crucial thing on the superhighways, and they can be a success. On the air pollution, yeah, of course we need to cut traffic, and you know, great idea on Hammersmith flyover, make it into a cycle lane. When we are through the games, let's make the Olympic lane on the Euston Road a cycle lane. Why shouldn't that become a cycle lane? Because this, I mean, it's not for me to recommend anything to the editor of the Times, but in fact, the whole issue of air pollution is a public health scandal, and in a couple of years, nobody will believe that successive mayors did nothing about it. Ken was getting there, he was thinking about introducing the low emission zone, well, he did introduce the low emission zone and so on, but Boris has taken us backwards. On the dust suppressants, he's put pot plants by the side of roads to reduce the measurement of the pollution, not reducing the pollution itself, but the measurement, so that we don't get the fine from the EU. He's also using the dust suppressants around the measuring stations, around the monitoring stations, again to suppress the measurement, not the pollution. I mean, I'm not sure if I would stop using them. I might use the dust suppressants around hospitals and schools. That might be a good use for it, you know, if we've got the money to do that. Air pollution, massive problem, and 80% of the pollution is from traffic, so we have to reduce the traffic. On the bikes everywhere, I go on holiday with my bike. I get really offended when you can't take 2 bikes on Eurostar, or you have to send it the day before or whatever. Very, very annoying. The 2 big things that stop people cycling, particularly women, are cycle safety, so we have to make the roads safe, and the other is security. They don't know where to leave your bike. We have to make sure we have more security. On this new legislation, I believe wholeheartedly in bike training, but quite honestly, we need to change our legal priorities on the road, and actually, if you're driving 2 tons of metal at speed, you should be responsible for yourself. It is not for vulnerable road users to have ears and eyes everywhere. You as a driver have to take the responsibility, and if you knock somebody over, you should take the blame if it's your fault.
Can I just ask Brian Paddick to follow up on that question, because clearly an accident that hurts or injures a cyclist is a terrible thing, and not only for the person who's injured, but very often for the person who's behind the wheel of the car or the truck. And the question that was raised here is a really important one, which is how do you legislate to make those trucks safer, but how do you also encourage cyclists to understand the threats and dangers on the road? And in practical terms, it's a very difficult problem to fix that. And I wondered, Brian Paddick, whether you had any thoughts on it.
I mean, Steve, I have some sympathy in that I don't think responsible owners of lorry fleets who install sensors and the right mirrors to protect cyclists should be at a commercial disadvantage, which is why we need legislation to make it compulsory on every lorry, so that, as I say, so that nobody is at a commercial disadvantage. And I'm afraid I agree with Jenny. I mean, if you are in charge of something that can become a lethal weapon, let's face it, like a huge lorry or even a car, then it is your responsibility to make sure that you do not run over, kill or injure cyclists. Yes, of course, it is important to educate particularly young people about that. Maybe there could be an information pack that is sold alongside. When you buy a cycle, you also get a copy of the highway code, or one that is specifically for cyclists to help raise awareness of that. But it is the responsibility of the motorised transport driver to make sure that is the case. I'm interested actually in terms of the assessment of our different manifestos in terms of which is greenest, because I believe that the Liberal Democrats have got the most ambitious targets in terms of air pollution, where we say that all buses in central London by 2016 should be electric, zero emission. And this is done in other cities around the world. I mean, it is technically possible to do that, as well as eventually replacing all the taxis with electric taxis. And with taxis, we know, if you take the total lifetime cost of a taxi, bearing in mind the increasing cost of diesel, that it's actually cheaper to run an electric taxi than it is to run a diesel taxi. So maybe we need to have a scrappage scheme or a 0% loan scheme so that taxi drivers can be encouraged to replace their taxis with electric. But they can pay that loan off plus over the lifetime of the taxi by using electricity rather than diesel.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, there are lots of people who've got questions, so if I go on to Minister Boris Johnson, I'm going to ask him a few more questions. There's a lady here and a gentleman. Where we've got mics here? Yes, sorry. Yeah, yours the lady. There she is. Yeah, just behind you.
Yeah, I would just like to say, bring a point up that this gentleman back there said, that I would like to be able to put my bicycle on the DLR.
Yeah.
I had a bicycle puncture when I was way out in the far east of London, and really had a challenge jumping on the DLR and jumping off, being thrown off, jumping on the next one to try and get back home. And being stuck out there in the dark and the cold would not have been a very good idea. And the other point I want to make is that just coming on my way here, I took a cycle path just to the south of the other side of Westminster Bridge to get here, and there's about 5 metres of cycle path which is on the pavement, and then it comes to an abrupt end, and then I got laid into verbally by a pedestrian who I managed to miss quite miraculously. But it should not be like that. I'm trying to get myself here in the safest possible way, and I should not be insulted on my way.
Thank you very much. There's a gentleman here who's actually in his cycling kit, so he looks like he's entitled here on the front, yes.
Dave Shannon, Cycling Officer, London Borough of Islington. Candidates, will you install a representative of one of the cycling interest groups on the board of TfL?
Okay, good question. Thank you very much. And there's a gentleman down here.
Hi, Carlton Reid from bikebiz.com. Question for the candidates, but especially other candidates apart from Boris, because he hasn't seemed to have done a great deal on this. Addison Lee. What would the candidates, what would they have done with Addison Lee that Boris hasn't done?
Thank you very much. We will, let's do this like this. I'm going to ask Boris to deal with the question of whether or not you would have a cycling interest group on the TfL board, and then go to Ken to answer the questions about DLR and Addison Lee.
Well, I will certainly, I'm a cyclist, I cycle every day, I'm the chair of TfL. Whether I put someone else on the board to represent cycling, I'm not sure, but I will have, because it's part of the, I will have a cycling commissioner. How about that? Can I answer some of these other questions that were raised? Because I took quite a lot of incoming about air quality, and everybody, everybody says I get nul point for air quality. Correct. Actually, if you look at what has happened over the last 4 years, and again I have this sad obligation to draw your attention to the statistics, London's air quality has improved over the last 4 years. If you look at the BBC, The BBC themselves have a very good piece on their website showing that the key pollutants, if you look at NOx, if you look at particulates, they're both down, and I'm often told that we have the worst air quality in Europe. It's an assertion that I've heard both from, actually I think just from Ken. Jenny doesn't say this. The truth is that Paris has worse air quality than London, so does Zurich, so does Basel. It doesn't mean it's perfect, it doesn't mean there isn't more that we could do. We will do more. I would also take issue with the suggestion that my policy is to drive people into cars or public transport. On the contrary, ridership on the tube, on the buses, has been going up steadily throughout the last 4 years. It is now at an all-time high. It will continue to increase. We are absolutely crazy if we cut investment in mass transit systems in London. And just on Vancouver and getting bikes on buses. I've seen what they do in Vancouver. They have kind of cowcatcher things at the front of the bike. I studied its operation. It struck me that it would slow down the bus, I have to say, is my view. I'm not convinced we can readily import it to this thing. But you know, we'll have a look at it. I think it is difficult to get. I mean, they had a real hassle on the DLR. I'm sorry about it. We'll see what we can do to get bikes on the DLR. I would love to get bikes more readily onto all forms of transport in this city, but it's not always easy. I don't think I could promise, for instance, to get the hire bikes onto the tube. I'm not sure that would be a good use of. Does anybody seriously want me to put the hire bikes on the tube? No. Okay. Well, let's have a bit of common sense here. I don't think that is. I don't think on Crossrail.
Points generally.
Yeah. Tackling accidents generally and the overall responsibility for accidents and culpability being with people who drive 2-ton, 5-ton vehicles. Of course I understand that. And of course people who drive those vehicles should pay more care and more attention. And most of these tragic accidents that we see involve, I think the largest single category is HGVs turning left without due care and attention. And it is absolutely tragic. That's why we do so much work, why we've issued, I think, 25,000 Fresnel lenses, why we work with truck drivers like you do, sir, try and get them to understand what the risks to cyclists are. We also put cyclists into the cabs of HGVs so that they understand what it's like to drive an HGV. We pay for this and TfL will continue to do it. But I must respectfully say to you that it is also an obligation on cyclists to obey the laws of the road, and it is vital.
Ken Livingstone, I'm going to ask you just to address the question about the interaction between pedestrians and cyclists and the question about Addison Lee.
Well, I think that the key there is we should be training kids in school about how to ride a bike and what the rules are. One of the things I'm proposing to do is allocate a police officer to each secondary school as a point of contact. And this would be very good as another role that they would actually play there, because a lot of schools don't really training like that at all. On the question of Addison Lee, I think Addison Lee is everything that's unattractive about the taxi trade. Apart from giving £25,000 for us campaign last time. Here's a man who actually has the most abusive working relationship with his staff. Rather than employ them properly, he requires them to be available all the waking hours God sends, charges an enormous sum of money, and frankly, there are no circumstances in which it could be justified to allow minicabs into bus lanes. There are 60,000 minicabs. It would totally change the nature of bus lanes. It would discourage cyclists from using them, and this is something that has to be completely resisted right the way down the line. On the point about air quality, there's nothing to stop the Mayor's office from today issuing smog warnings to tell people when they shouldn't go out. The reason they won't do it at City Hall is it'd be too embarrassing to reveal just how bad their air quality is. Of course, some of the figures show air quality is not as bad as anywhere else, because this mayor has paid £1 million to a firm to spray gluey water around the testing stations that reduces the reading of it. And the simple fact is, in this city, at least 4,000 people die prematurely every year, on average by 11.5 years. I mean, it's a death toll bigger than 9/11, but everybody dies individually in their bed. If they died at one point in time, it was a lead item on every news bulletin board. Kids growing up near our main roads in this city have lung capacity 15% below the norm. And this has to be an absolute priority for the next term. Press ahead, do everything possible. One of the first things I'll do as mayor is go to meet the European Commissioner to say, well, look, stop thinking about a £300 million fine on London because of our air quality. Show us what we can do, all the measures to bring this in. I want my kids to grow up without lung complications.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for three quick questions. The one thing is, as long as you don't represent some kind of lobby in this, I'm asking sort of individuals who don't represent a lobby in it. And I'm going to ask this gentleman here first.
Hi. Hi. My name's Will Jeffries. I live in Lewisham. I'm here because my brother Rob was killed by a car last year, exactly a year ago. Knocked over, 50 miles behind, struck in broad daylight, not in London, but he was a Londoner. He was the champion of Herne Hill, still holds track record. I think it's somewhat glib to say that cyclists also have to obey the laws of the road. Cyclists don't go around killing car drivers or lorry drivers. The question is therefore, the person who killed my brother was fined £80, convicted of careless driving. We were told by the courts that was the most that could possibly happen to my brother. If we appealed against that, that was called an abuse of process on our behalf. So I want to know, what is the mayor going to do to stand up for cyclists to make sure that people who kill cyclists get the punishment they deserve?
Christian Mormar, writer and broadcaster about Transport Matters. I just want to ask Boris one very specific question, which is, Boris, don't you realise that there's a conflict between the idea of smoothing traffic flow and not having a hierarchy of users, which there used to be, which put walkers and cyclists at the top, and cycling safety, and that unless you get round your hang-up of smoothing traffic flow, you will never improve the safety of cyclists?
I'm setting up a social enterprise, Carry Me Bikes. This is all about practical family cycling, and I noticed that only one of you up there has mentioned family cycling explicitly, and that's Siobhan on the end. So my question is, how many of you, what measures would you put in the physical environment to make family cycling safer and more pleasant, especially using cargo bikes, for instance? In Copenhagen, one in 4 families with 2 children or more own a cargo bike, and I suspect if cycling is to increase in London, this will increase here as well. What physical measures can you do to make that safer and more pleasant?
Okay, very good. I'm going to ask Boris Johnson for you to address the question both about the punishment of people who kill or seriously injure cyclists, and also the point that's been made about the priority, restoring the priority for pedestrians and cyclists.
Well, in the case of HGV drivers, who are very often culpable for these deaths, we do watch very carefully in TfL what happens, and I do take a very keen interest in the punishments that they get, and I agree with you that sometimes the punishment does not fit the crime, and I think that very often the HGV drivers who are simply not paying attention to the road in front of them should receive much heavier sentences. One of the things I'm setting up is a sentencing unit in the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime to study this kind of thing so that I can make representations to the Justice Department about deficiencies in this matter. That's, I think, the best I can offer you, and I will certainly represent the interests of cyclists in respect of the punishments that motorists receive. I just want to say something. I think family cycling is wonderful. I'm a passionate believer in it. I think I've cycled with 2 children on my bicycle at various stages. I think it's something I would encourage. I want families to feel safe on our roads, and that's why, by the way, I don't agree with Brian's analysis. I think that confidence is engendered by numbers. If the more people there are on the road, the greater the confidence there is. And that is the logic behind the cycle superhighways, and I will defend it. I know that there are some people here who, in an ideal world, would see every motorist banished from the streets of London. And I have to tell you, well, okay. Perhaps I've misread. And forgive me. But I don't think, and I know that you want, Christian, your question about the hierarchy. It's always egalitarians who want to impose hierarchies in things. I don't particularly agree with you, Christian. I think that you can improve safety for all vulnerable road users by the sensible use of improvements to our roads, by new technology, and that is what we're doing. And I think that I think we've got to move away from the idea that, and I'm sorry to say this, but here's what you lynch me now. To move away from the idea that cyclists are somehow morally superior to other road users, because there are plenty of people who I'm afraid aren't able to ride a bike. There are plenty of people who need to use a car. We need to educate them about cycling in London, but we cannot expect to pastoralise our streets.
Could I ask Brian Paddick, obviously you know a little bit about the issues of crime and punishment and the process in the courts, just to address this question about the way in which people are treated who have either killed or seriously injured cyclists. What's your judgment on that?
Well, I can't imagine how you feel, except when I was an inspector, one of my constables, the only person in his life was his father, and the only thing he cared about was his dog, and his father took his dog for a walk on Blackheath, and he was wiped up. Both him and the dog were killed by a speeding motorist on Blackheath. And I looked after that officer, and we went to court, and because the skid marks went over 3 different types of road surface, they couldn't do him for speed, they could only do him for careless driving, and he got a small fine as well. So I know exactly the sort of feeling, from personal experience. We have got to do something to make drivers more responsible. And I have to say, I have been a bit disappointed with Boris Johnson's lack of imagination and lack of policies in this campaign. But this afternoon, I'm absolutely disgusted, and I'm really getting quite angry. If a cyclist cycles irresponsibly, he or she doesn't kill people. If somebody drives a lorry or a car irresponsibly, they kill people. That is the difference, and that is why pedestrian and cycle safety must be the priority over speeding traffic.
Right,
You've said more than enough already, thank you very much. As far as family cycling is concerned, what we have to do is we have to make sure that the cycle lanes are wide enough to be able to accommodate these carriers that you carry the children in. And that is why we need a bigger proportion of the road space given over to cyclists. And I'm afraid that will have to be
Can I say I agree with the action Jenny's taken today in writing to the Metropolitan Police to ask them to investigate the Mayor's Office for corporate manslaughter when they took the decision to remove the cycling safety measures from Bow Roundabout. It's no good sitting here complaining about careless drivers when careless mayoral officials remove cycling safety measures even when TfL has come back to them and said, this will put cyclists' lives at risk. That's corporate manslaughter.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we're running out of time, and what I did promise was at the beginning each of the mayoral candidates would get a chance to sum up by making their case, both on cycling or any other issue that they think should be of concern to Londoners as we go into this election. And given that everyone is going to have points that they want to pick up from the conversation we've had, I hope that we can do that by inviting each one to have 2 minutes to sum up. And what I was going to suggest is that we sum up in this order, that we start with the independent candidate, Siobhan Benita, then turn to Jenny Jones, then ask Brian Paddick, then Ken Livingstone, and wind up with Boris Johnson. So may I invite you first, Siobhan Benita.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there were so many issues today that we didn't cover that I would have liked to have spoken about. Just very quickly on the family safety, we have to get much more creative about putting in the wider lanes in the areas where families are going to use them most. And also, I said before, you hear a lot of warm words about doing things. How do you actually do it? You need to be more creative as a mayor in finding the funding to do these things. The mayor has responsibility now on health and well-being. The mayor chairs the Health Improvement Board for London. Cycling, family cycling in particular, is as much a health and well-being issue as it is anything else, and there is money available there. So one of the things I would do is make it a standing issue every time I chaired a Health Improvement Board to actually look at how we were improving cycling across the city. That's a very creative way of doing this. My wider pitch, though, as I haven't had many opportunities to do it in this campaign, is to remind people that on the 3rd of May, when you go to vote, this is your one opportunity as a voter to not to have to vote a traditional party politician. The role of mayor was never ever created to be kept as the reserve of party politicians. This is your chance to vote for an individual leader for London. If you want somebody who is going to spend their time fighting for Londoners, and that includes cycle safety as a priority, and not wasting their time fighting old party political battles, then please give me your first preference vote. Thank you.
Jenny Jones.
Thank you. I'm glad Ken raised the issue of my letter. I didn't know whether to bring it up or not, but the fact is, the mayor doesn't, or rather, the Tory candidate, Boris, doesn't seem to accept that this smoothing traffic flow policy has actually made any difference to cycling safety, whereas I think most people in this room would say it has made a difference, it's made it worse. And the way that Boris could help, TfL has refused a freedom of information request since November on this very issue about why the decision was made on Bow Roundabout in particular. Will Boris commit today to releasing that information before the election so that we can know the true involvement in the mayor's smoothing traffic flow with the deaths at Bow Roundabout that I think were needless tragedies? So that's my question to Boris. Now, thank you so much for this, on the cycling campaign. I was absolutely crushed only to get 83% out of 100. I can only say that as mayor, which is looking, I must say, increasingly unlikely, or as an assembly member, I will do my utmost to push this up to 100%. I can see I failed on the lethal danger to cyclists. Well, Brian's got loads of good policies and that, so I'll just steal all of Brian's policies. And I will do my best. The Green Group at London Assembly, I think, has done a huge amount for cycling over the years, not least to just get it onto the agenda, because when we first started talking about cycling, we were laughed at by the other political parties. So please do, if you can't bear to vote for me for mayor, please give us a strong Green vote on the Assembly so that we can continue the good work on walking and on cycling. Thank you.
Brian Paddick.
If you give me the chance, as I said earlier on, I would want people to look back after 4 years of Liberal Democrats in charge at City Hall and say that London was a more civilised place, particularly on the roads. I mean, safety has to be the #1 priority. If we can stop anybody being seriously injured or killed, whether it's through criminal activity or whether it's because the roads are not safe for cyclists or pedestrians, then we should do that. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to get people who are experts Act Cycle Safety onto the board of TfL, looking at these junctions, because cyclists know these issues better than anybody. So, you know, I would say we have to have cycle representatives making these sorts of decisions. Clearly, we want clean air to breathe when we're cycling along, and as I have said before, London Liberal Democrats have got the most ambitious programme of turning all London's taxis and buses over to electricity to make them zero emissions, and having lived for a long time on a bus route, make them a lot quieter as well. But one of the other important things is we need to seriously look at the nighttime lorry ban, to try and take lorries off the roads during the daytime when there are more cyclists around, looking at common distribution points so that instead of having hundreds of local delivery vans, there is just one common fleet in London to cut down both on pollution and the number of vans on the roads. If there is one thing that I am passionate about, and I think the Liberal Democrats are passionate about, that's equality. And never is it more important than creating equality on our roads to make sure that cyclists and pedestrians are just as safe as car users.
Thank you.
None of the points that Jenny O'Brien have made I disagree with. I want to put in a wider context of where we are. If you remember when the Jubilee line extension opened, it was relatively spacious and you could get a seat most of the time. Now it's absolutely at capacity, barely a decade on. And part of the reason is the Jubilee line was planned in the early 1990s, and London's population had gone down to 6.75 million. Today it's 7.75, and there's most probably 250,000 illegals. And wherever you go, our transport system's absolutely at capacity. Well, even if the government, and I know we're on this platform as an anti-immigrant policy, but even if the government built a wall around the country, the natural growth in our population in this very young city means we're on our way to 9 million somewhere in the 2020s. And therefore the mayor's got to be planning for that. We need a huge increase in the capacity of public transport and facilities for pedestrians and cyclists if this city is to work. That means planning now for Crossrail 2, planning now for Crossrail 3. We're just at the point where we could have a proper electric bus. We had the nice little single-deckers doing fairly short routes during my second term. The technology there is now. What I want to do is London to be at the forefront of that. We should be able to have those buses built here, be the first city in the world to have an electric fleet, improving, cutting down noise massively and improving our air quality. But this has got to be, my biggest disagreement with Boris is not these carried on opening all the things I started, I'm delighted. But he hasn't been planning the things that will make this city work in the 2020s. And the trouble of our electoral system is everyone's focused on winning the next election. Politics is about planning for 10 to 20 years ahead, so your city and your society can work. That's what I want to do.
Well, there is one point of Brian's that I disagree with, and that is his contention that irresponsible cycling endangers nobody. I don't accept that.
I said he doesn't kill people.
Well, I don't accept that either. Because I'm afraid that irresponsible cycling can kill pedestrians, and indeed it can be responsible for the lives of cyclists themselves. And that's why I think it's very important that we should all deprecate irresponsible cycling, all right? Secondly, I think I hope very much that people will look not so much at what people have said this afternoon, but what actually I've done over the last 4 years. And if you look at my record on cycling, I've done more in 4 years than Ken Livingstone did in 8. Indeed, I've spent more money on cycling in this city. I put in the cycle superhighways, I put in the best bike car scheme in the world. You've seen a massive increase in cycling. It may be, you've seen a massive increase in cycling, and contrary to the constant assertions we've had today, in spite of that massive increase in cycling, we have seen a reduction in KSIs on TfL roads and across London. That does not mean that things are perfect and that there isn't more we can do. I humbly say to you, I may not conform to your to the idea of a stereotypical cyclist. There you go. I do not have wicket-thin brown legs or dreadlocks, or I do not charge around in lycra. I do not jump lights. I'm frozen like a pillar. I'm frozen like a pillar. Lights, and nor are you. But I ask you to. When in holes, stop digging. I ask you to recognise that I have cycling in my heart. I love cycling. I think it is a wonderful way forward for this city, and I will continue to invest in cycling. And I have to say to you that I do not think it is possible credibly to offer to improve cycling in this city when you're going to cut transport budgets in London. We will take cycling forward over the next 4 years. We will greatly increase the number of people cycling, and we will make it safer still. I hope you can count on my support.
Ladies and gentlemen, I fear that there are still a few unanswered questions. That may be the case. There have been a number of questions that have been put to me, a gentleman here and another one in the audience. What I hope we can do at the paper at least is give those questions an airing and continue to put them to the candidates and whoever wins on Thursday. May I finish by saying that I really do understand there are huge pressures on the times of all of our candidates. The fact that they've come here, committed the time and their thoughts to dealing with the question of cycling in London speaks well of them and speaks well of you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Thank you.
All right.